Hi students, in this video, we will cover the first chapter of your Sec 4 textbook on how the Cold War started and what were the reasons behind it. Okay, so there are a lot of reasons. I will try to summarize some of them so that it's easier for you all to remember. All right. Okay. So at the end of this chapter, you should understand very clearly the concept, what is a Cold War, and the motivation behind the Cold War. And most importantly, for the purpose of preparing for your essays, we will explain the various reasons for the Cold War. All right. So the Cold War, we know, is basically a war where there's no direct conflict, there's indirect fighting. So you see this cartoon, okay? Both sides have very strong weapons such as these very big missiles and bombs, but they don't choose to actually fight each other seriously. Okay, so it's not a serious conflict. Okay, so we call it a Cold War. Okay, it's basically, okay, there's no direct confrontation. That means they fight indirectly. And this describes the period between two parties, the USA and also the USSR, okay, between this almost 50-year period. All right, so if they do not fight directly, okay, how do they fight? Let's find out a bit more. So in the Cold War, we know we'll basically divide the war into two parts. You see the parts in red are led by the USSR, the parts in purple are led by the USA, who are mostly democratic countries. The areas led by the USSR are mostly communist countries, and they are like two big alliances, okay, two big groups of countries, and many of them who are from different alliances, right? They do not like each other, okay? Even though during World War II, some of them they were allies and they fought the Hitler, Nazi Germany together, all right? So they did not fight each other directly because they were very afraid, because both sides, you can see, looks very powerful, very big territory, very large territories, very strong. So they don't want to fight each other directly. So they fought each other indirectly instead. And this is how they do it, is they fought using proxies. That means they fight in other countries. Okay, they fight in other countries. So instead of the US and UK fighting the Soviet directly, maybe they'll all go to a different country X and fight there instead. So for example, later you'll learn in Korea, in Cuba, both countries will get involved, these countries, and sort of fight indirectly in a separate country. That means they did not fight each other directly, they went to another country to fight. All right, so some of the reasons, okay, these are the broad reasons why they may want to engage in a Cold War. And this one is still very relevant today, because country, they want to compete for economic interests, okay, so compete for business, compete for resources. They want to gain territory, they want to gain security, including territories to build military bases. These are very important. They want to continue to have a lot of political influence. For example, later we'll explore a bit more how the communist countries wanted to spread communism, while the democratic countries wanted to spread democracy. Okay, and last but not least, you know, some of the reasons later we'll see that they dislike and they fear each other so much because they have a very bad history and a very bad relationship. Okay, so that is why they have a lot of tension, okay, over the 50-year period. All right, you're gonna skip the video. So we're gonna briefly cover it like this. We're gonna look at the reasons in 3 time periods: before World War II, during World War II, and after World War II. In each of this time period, okay, we can see a worsening relationship. Okay, the impact, the worsening relationship between the two groups of country, the communist and the democratic countries. Okay, so the communist country, as I said, represents by the USSR, then democratic countries represented by USA. And each of these 3 time periods, there were various events that had happened, okay, that eventually worsened and impacted the relationship between these two groups. Okay, so we're gonna explore a little bit more what are some of the events and what was the USA wanted to do, what the USSR wanted to do differently. And as a result, they clashed and they worsened the relationship. Okay, So these are the broad factors. It roughly follows your textbook factors lah. So it looks like a lot of points, but this, if you need to memorize anything like exam, let's say you want to study this chapter for exam, you might want to memorize this. This will be the so-called sub headers lah that you want to know. Okay, your factors, possible factors that you can use, because each of these factor you can write a paragraph basically, because there's a lot to be said. All right, so you can memorize these things if you want to study this for your exam, for your O level. Right? So I will go in next few slides. Okay, I will cover each of these points in turn, and I'll try to summarize. As you summarize more important, try to understand what each of these points mean, and test yourself and ask yourself, for example, if I go through ideological differences later, are you able to retell the factor in your own words? Okay, so if you can do it, it means you understand the factor, and when you memorize these things, then it makes more sense. No point memorizing this when you don't understand the factors. Okay, so I'm going to cover each of these points that can be grouped in these 3 time periods. Okay, all right, so the first thing you want to know is that the 2 groups of countries, they have very different ideologies. They have very different views on how the country should be run. In essence, one group believes in democracy, one group believes in communism. Okay, democracy is believed by the group led by the USA. Communism obviously is in the group led by the Soviet Union, the USSR. Okay, and the key difference between USA and between democracy and communism, first thing, in the democracy, all you need to know is people can vote, they can choose the type of government they want. The term that we use is called self-determination. Self-determination means you can determine how you want to govern yourself. Okay, so it's basically like freedom, democracy. Okay, and in the USA, people also have another keyword, see, freedom. Okay, to have a free market, which basically means they can own property, they can be allowed to get richer and buy and sell and do small business, and can do their own businesses. Whereas in the communist, later you see it's very different. All right. So for example, in Singapore, we have a free market. You can own property, you can buy a house, you can get richer than other people. So that's the key idea of a free market. All right. On the other hand, the Soviet Union do not really have free voting. They have a generally what I call authoritarian system of government. That means they are very controlled, tightly controlled by the government, very little freedom. Okay. And they believe that the power should not be with the people. The government should get the most power. That's why we want to centralize a lot of power in the government, especially the Communist Party, which runs the country. All right. And unlike a capitalist free market economy that the USA have, where you can own your own property, the USSR has what I call a command economy, which basically means the state controls everything and you cannot own private property. You cannot get really rich. All right. So how does this impact the relation, and how can we use to explain how the Cold War started? It's because they have this very 2 different group of ideology. The 2 groups of country look very different, and that's why you start to get a lot of tension, because each side, they start to see each other as a threat to political economy and influence. Remember, the communists, later you learn that the communists want to spread communism, want to convert as many countries to communism as possible. Same thing with the USA, they want to convert as many people to become democratic countries, free market, countries with free market. Okay, so they're competing with each other, and they see each other as a sort of a threat in terms of who is correct. Okay, each side believed that their system was better and believed that the other system was bad. Okay, for example, USSR thought that, if people can get very rich in a free market system like in the USA, think like today you have Elon Musk, very rich, right? Okay, they did not like the system. They want to portray as evil. On the other hand, America, in USA, they will portray communism as very backward, very controlling, very bad, because they take away a lot of freedom. So both sides think they are superior and wanted to spread the ideology to the rest of the world. And when they try to do that, eventually it will lead to a lot of tension, because both sides think they are wrong, and they will go do a lot of things to make sure that the other party don't get their way and get to influence more countries. Okay, they'll compete to influence as many countries as they can against each other. All right. Second factor. Okay, this will be quite a long video, so at any point if you're tired, please pause and catch up another time. Okay, so the second factor why the two groups of countries destroy each other goes a long way back, all the way to the Russian Civil War, when Russia became the first communist country in the world. And at that point in time, it wasn't a very straightforward, communists won and they set a new country. There was a very long and bloody process called the Russian Civil War, between the Reds, who were the communists, and the Whites, who were sort of the anti-communists. And at that time, okay, so why did the USSR and the USA have such a bad relationship? Because back in the day, the USA was already supporting the Whites, supporting the communist enemies. The communists were the Red, and the US supported a group called the Whites. So even from a long time ago, they have a very bad relationship and a very bad impression on each other. Okay, and why did the USA get involved? Why did the Western countries like UK, US get involved? Because they were against communism. And just now we said they have a different ideology, right? So this is one of the earlier instances where they tried to, the different ideology caused a sort of a conflict. Okay, so the USA, they supported the American troops, their own troops, to try and aid the anti-communists, the Whites. But eventually, as we all learned, the Reds won. Okay, they were not very successful in defeating the communists. Okay, they wanted to undermine Russia, undermine communism. Okay, and of course, if you're the Soviet Union, you'll be very unhappy because you are trying to sell your own country, your own communist country, and the USA is there creating trouble for you. Okay, and of course, eventually, this will sour the relationship between the two groups, because the Soviet Union will remember that for a long time ago, they have offended the Soviet Union during the Russian Civil War. So when you don't forget a very old incident, it may affect their relationship in the future as well. All right, so there was a very old feud that will eventually maybe be mentioned from time to time, for the Soviet Union to justify why they had to be against the US. Okay, so it's a very long ago incident that may still explain why they do not like each other. Okay, the more moving on a little bit more. Okay, so we can see that the West, the US, have been trying to stop communism, and even though the communists succeeded and they formed USSR, the country, okay, they were not recognized as an official country, because one of the ways was because the USA did not recognize it and did not allow it to join the League of Nations. Reluctant to recognize basically means it was not allowed to join. Okay, not allowed to join the League of Nations, not even considered an official nation, a proper nation, good enough to join a League of Nations. The USSR only later joined, much later. The League of Nations started around, you remember, in 1919 when the Treaty of Versailles was signed, right? So many years later, only then was the Soviet Union allowed to join. So it's kind of treated like second class. Okay, and the only reason why it was eventually able to learn because many countries decided to leave the league, and they realized you can't have a League of Nations if you have very few countries. So eventually, only many years later, then they did allow the Soviet Union to join the league. By then, if you're a Soviet Union, you'll probably be thinking, I'm second class, right? I didn't get to join at the start. They only pity me and they accept me at the end. I'm kind of like a last resort, second choice. So the Soviet Union definitely wouldn't like it. Okay, and it leads to a lot of distrust and later hostility, because they felt that they were not treated as equals. They were not treated as equals. You can write that, not treated as equals. And the Soviet Union also think that the US and the West were trying to undermine them, hoping that one day maybe Soviet Union will collapse, so don't need to recognize it as a country. Okay. All right, so we are going to move towards the World War II period. Okay, so these points here seems to happen many years ago. Okay, so now let's go on to World War II, where it's more recent, and we can start to, because a more recent incident will help us to explain better why the Cold War eventually broke out. You can talk about why the Cold War broke up because of all these very long ago reasons, but I will say personally, the closer you get towards the current day, during World War II or post-World War II, which was when the Cold War sort of happened officially, then you get closer, the reason becomes stronger and stronger as you go towards the present time. Okay, so during World War II, what are some of the conflicts that worsened the relationship between the US and the USSR? Okay, so let's look at these 3 points. Okay, so the first reason why the USA did not like the USSR is because the USSR was not friendly to the USA at the start. Initially, the USSR was decided to befriend Hitler's Nazi Germany. Okay, remember during World War II, Nazi Germany were one group and they were fighting UK, the other group, and they were fighting US over on the other side of the ocean. Okay, they were enemies, and the USSR was friend to the USA enemy, friends with Germany. So if you are US, you imagine, this, what do you call it? A friend of your enemy is your enemy, right? So the USA definitely did not have very good impression of Soviet Union because they are supporting the allies of Germany. They were the allies with Germany. Okay, so only 2 years later, then when Hitler broke the Nazi-Soviet alliance, the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact. Okay, this is the official word, Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact. That means they don't want to fight each other. Only when Hitler decided to betray and backstab the Soviet Union, only then did Stalin and the USSR decide to ally with Britain and the USA. Okay, so they were not allies to begin with. They were kind of like an afterthought. Only after when Germany betrayed USSR, then they formed the alliance. Same thing, if you are a second choice, how good and how strong can the relationship be, right? Okay, so even though they were allied, okay, they were what you call a marriage of convenience. That means, it basically means they are not the first choice. They did not want it at the start. Okay, that's why they will only do it because they have a common enemy to defeat Germany, their common objective. Okay, but because you are not really a first choice, to ally with each other, there were a lot of mistrust and suspicion. Okay, and the second reason why during the war period, besides the fact that they were not allies to begin with, okay, was because they disagreed over the policy of appeasement. Okay, Britain and France didn't wanted to ally with Hitler, didn't wanted to be very friendly to Germany at the start because they think if I'm friendly with Hitler, I give Hitler what he wants, maybe Germany will stop conquering other countries and stop asking for so much. Okay, so even though the UK, France thought that is a good strategy, but Stalin, the Soviet Union, considered UK looking very weak, keep giving you Hitler. So they lost respect. They lost respect for the UK. And when you lose respect, how good can a relationship be, right? So Stalin was also very angry when they were not when they were trying to sign an agreement with Hitler, they did not include Stalin. So Stalin feel very left out. And they feel like, this group of people discussing Hitler, they're all softies. They did not have a lot of respect for the UK and the France. Okay. So only when Germany was making significant advance, that means this invasion into USSR was very dangerous, very successful. Only then did Stalin decide, okay, you know what? Let's form an alliance with Britain. We need an ally to help us fight the war. Okay, so it was kind of a desperate kind of alliance and relationship. Okay, and it's not a relationship built on a lot of trust. Okay, so there continued to be a lot of mistrust because they felt betrayed by how Stalin was befriended Hitler in the earlier days. Okay, so there were a lot of differences and distrust. Okay, second big reason during the war why the relationship between USA and the USSR soured is because there was a delay in opening the second front. If you, how can I, okay. So you can imagine, okay, you don't really need to know the world map, but you need to know that Germany is in the middle. USSR was fighting in the east, they were fighting here very hard. You have UK and US on the other side. USSR wanted UK and US to come and attack Germany so that maybe the war between the Germany and USSR would not be so fierce, because Germany will want to maybe send some of their troops back to fight the US, and this will relieve the pressure on the USSR. So the UK and US, they delayed, they did not fight the Germany, even though Stalin was in the Soviet Union was badly attacked. They did not come to Stalin's rescue very instantly because they were not very confident in defeating Germany, and they only wanted to fight Germany and send troops in if they are very certain that they will win. In the meantime, they will probably wait and adopt a more defensive position. All right. So if you are Stalin, if you're the Soviet Union, you are fighting for your life against Germany, and you have your new allies, UK, US, refusing to do anything to distract Germany and spread out Germany's forces, you will definitely feel like, what's the point of having this ally? All right. Okay. So we talked about this previously. So the Red Army was having a lot of pressure, and they wanted the Second Front to divert Germany's resources, fight in the west, so that the Soviet Union will have it a bit easier and have less pressure. Okay. So because they took so long to start a second front, remember in 1941, only then did Soviet became allies. They had to wait until 1944, almost 3 years, waited for almost 3 years before the UK and US decided, okay, you know, time is right, let's attack Germany directly. Okay, so definitely Stalin thought it was a ploy. They thought the UK and US were purposely not sending their troops so that both Germany and Soviet Union can weaken each other. And this led to a lot of mistrust and a very worsened relationship. All right. And the third point, now we're going to look at the third point during the war, is this thing called the disagreement. So for this point, we're talking about the war that's about to come to an end and how they are going to settle and deal with Germany after the war. So they disagree over how to deal with Germany. Okay, so I'm going to skip through some of this point because it's rather wordy. But basically, they had these two conferences. One is the Yalta Conference, and one is the Potsdam Conference. All you need to know, I think, okay, is that this conference to decide what to do with Germany, what to do with the rest of Europe. You know, Hitler and Germany conquered so many territory. We need to fix Europe again. So what do we do with Germany and the rest of Europe? How do we run the country? Do we form new countries? Do we take out new countries, or what? Who's going to be in charge? Will the USA or USSR be in charge? So this is what the conferences, Yalta and Potsdam Conference, is about. Okay, so one of the things, you know, they will disagree over is, you know, how to run Germany. Do you split it into zone? Do you demilitarize Germany or not? It's like the TOV all over again. How are you going to treat Germany, right? And it's not easy decision. There'll be a lot of disagreement. Okay, I'm going to skip some of these details. Okay, in summary, okay, the USA and the USSR have very different views on how the post-war settlement should be done, what they should do in Germany. The allies, the US, okay, when I say the allies here, I'm going to refer to US and UK, the democratic countries. They wanted to be less harsh this time, and so that Germany can recover as soon as possible. And they wanted Germany to be strong so that they will stand up against communism. As a democratic country, they also want Germany and the other European countries to have free elections. Look like US and UK countries with freedom with elections. Okay, and therefore they did not want Germany to pay too much, just like in the TOB. They wanted to tone it down a little bit, okay, and have elections. On the other hand, the USSR wanted to punish Germany and make Germany weak, kind of like how France wanted in World War I. So in World War II, slightly different. The USSR was the one that wanted to punish Germany, okay, because the USSR suffered a lot, and they did not want to give the free elections that the USA wanted to give Germany. Okay, so there are some of the key differences. They wanted to set up a communist style of government that's friendly. Okay, they wanted the states, okay, including all these territories were all reclaimed by the USSR as they were fighting Germany. Okay, so they wanted all these new territories, right, to be communist and be a satellite state. A satellite state basically means they are going to listen. Oops, sorry. They are going to listen to the USSR and follow their orders. Okay, they're gonna treat the USSR as the boss, basically. Okay, that's why I call satellite state, orbiting and revolving around the USSR in everything you do. Okay, so the problem with that is also the Western allies became very suspicious. Why does the USSR want to have such a big network, big group of countries that's very close to USSR, right? And it started to lead to a lot of tension because they saw each other's move as being very suspicious. Okay, on the West, the US, they see Soviet move as trying to spread communism. Okay, creating all these pro-communist states in green here. Okay, and they saw the USSR as being very aggressive. Okay, last point about during the war that led to why the Cold War happened is because of the use of the atomic bomb. Okay, so we learned in the chapter 7, the atomic bomb is one of the reasons why Japan lost the war, right? So the atomic bomb is also one reason why the Cold War was intensified, because the main thing is the USA did not inform Stalin that they had such a bomb and they intend to use it. So Stalin got very annoyed and got very suspicious because today you use it on Japan, tomorrow maybe you can use it on Soviet Union and its friends, right? Stalin was very convinced that the US the bomb to try and dominate the world and become the best and most powerful country, and it led to an arms race. They felt very threatened. So Soviet Union, after seeing USA have an atomic bomb, they also wanted to create theirs, and they created their own bomb. And if one country has a bomb, the other country wants to have the bomb. If one country have 2 bombs, the other country wants to have 3 bombs. If one country have 3 bombs, the other country may want to have 10 bombs, more and more bombs. That's why it leads to an arms race. And when you have more weapons on both sides, it can lead to a lot of tension, because the reason why wars are dangerous is because both sides build out a lot of weapons, right? If both sides have very little weapons, we don't have to worry about the war so much. Okay. All right, let's look at the last group of factors. Okay, persevere on, take a break if you need to. Okay, this last group of factors are after World War II. Remember, during World War II, at least they have a common enemy. They have a common enemy, right? They were kind of still allies. So maybe the relationship wasn't that bad. In post-World War II, they don't have the common enemy anymore. Okay, the relationship will worsen a lot. Okay. Because you don't have a common enemy to fight already. You are only left with USA versus USSR and your friends. Okay, so let's look at how after World War II, the tensions between the Cold War escalated. Okay, these are some of the 4 main points, especially the last one. It's a very important point. All right, so the first point, devastation of Europe and the rise of superpowers. All you need to know for this one is Europe was basically very badly destroyed. Many people died. Infrastructure was destroyed. It was in ruins. Okay. On one hand, the USA wanted to rebuild Germany and Europe and keep them very strong, with very strong economy. Okay. They wanted, okay, to, okay, sorry. On the other hand, the USSR wanted, okay, to exert its influence. At that time, the USA was the strongest country. USSR was second place. Okay, both countries wanted to assert themselves as superpowers. Okay, they wanted to be decision makers on. They wanted to decide what is Europe's fate, and it leads to a lot of tension because, like we saw just now during the Potsdam and Yalta conference discussion, there was a lot of disagreement even before the war ended. So after the war ended, the issue wasn't resolved, so there continued to be a lot of disagreement. Okay, so the war has ended, no more common enemy, Hitler is dead. Okay, and without a common enemy, maybe you start to think, okay, I have to fight you. Okay, or I don't have to worry about this common enemy, I can use all my energy to fight you. So that is also a problem when after the war ended, when the alliance broke up. Okay, so both sides wanted to protect their own influence. The US wanted to protect its influence in Europe. The USSR wanted to protect its influence and power in Europe. And both sides thinks that they are trying to jeopardize each other and harm each other. Okay, I'm not really going through point by point, I'm just trying to summarize here. Okay, so on the Soviet Union's point of view, just now USA wanted to protect Europe and rebuild Europe, make Europe rich again. On the other hand, Soviet Union not so interested in that. USSR wanted to make sure that there is a very big buffer zone, so that the USSR, in case, if you are UK, you want to attack USSR, instead of attacking directly, you got all these countries to sort of block the attack. So to make the Soviet Union feel much more safer. All right. Okay, so they wanted to have as much buffer, have as much parts of Europe on their side. You see, Soviet Union as you can see, have almost half of Europe on their side, whereas the allies have, the gray countries have about another half also. So they wanted to have their own sphere of influence, wanted to have more followers, and as a result, it will lead to a lot of misunderstanding. Okay, later we'll explore a bit more. So we talked about this earlier already. The Soviet Union wanted to have this group of pro-USSR countries, also known as your satellite states, where you have a lot of influence and control. And when the Soviet Union wants to build up all these red states that is very close to it, the USA will be very alarmed and be very suspicious and think that Soviet Union is very aggressive. Maybe the USA want to build out its own version of its own satellite states that's very pro-US. Okay. All right, so both sides. Okay, on the other hand, Soviet Union also see it as a defensive measure. Okay, Soviet Union see it as defensive, but obviously USA will see it as a threat, as an offensive measure. Okay, so it led to a lot of mistrust. So the points here are repeating itself because the explanation is roughly very similar. You have a lot of disagreement, it leads to a lot of mistrust, it leads to tension, therefore it leads to the Cold War. Okay. All right, so the USA became convinced that the USSR wanted to expand its influence, so we want to control and suppress or to contain the USSR's influence. Otherwise, the USSR will have too many followers, too many friends, and the communist group will become too strong. Okay, so the USA was very worried about that. Okay, so let's look at the last point. How did America try to control and contain the USSR, make sure they do not expand so much? Okay, so these are the 4 examples. I'm going to briefly summarize. Again, you will not be able to memorize everything word for word, so let's summarize and understand. Okay, these 4 points of how US tried to control Soviet Union. The first point you want to talk about containment is who decided that USSR should be contained. And one of the names you might want to remember is this thing called Kennan, okay, or Kennan. Okay, they wanted, this guy works for the USA government. He is the head of American mission in Moscow. That means he is a US representative in USSR. He lives in USSR. He lives in Moscow, the capital, and he is there to observe what is USSR doing. Okay, as an ambassador, sort of. Okay, and he realized that, the USSR is a very dangerous, is expanding its influence. He's the one that advised the US president, back then President Truman, okay, that the USA should no longer follow an isolationist policy, but to be actively involved in Europe. So they want the USA to go and be involved in Europe and try and control the Soviet Union, make sure the Soviet Union doesn't get too powerful. Okay, if you follow an isolationist policy, means you don't care. whatever the USSR do, just let it do. But this man, Mr. Cannon, disagrees, saying USSR is getting too stronger, getting too many followers, too many friends under the communist group, right? USA, if we want to have a chance to become the most powerful country, we must start to control the USSR, make sure it doesn't get too strong. Okay, so what is this long telegram? A telegram, as you will know, is an app. You know, it's an app today, but in the past, it's a way of sending a message. So he sent this very long message back to the US government that, you know, Soviet Union is very dangerous. We must do something about it to stop the Soviet Union. So he's the guy that first suggested that the Soviet Union must be contained because it was getting too powerful and too influential. Okay, another example of containing the Soviet Union is Churchill's Iron Curtain speech. Basically, Churchill, if in case you forgot, okay, he's the UK Prime Minister. So he's a good friend of the USA because they are on the same side. He's the one that first said that, you know, there is this iron curtain that divides Soviet Union and the West. So let me go and show you a map. Okay, the map. So Churchill is basically saying, you know, there is this group of country that's pro-US, there's this group of country that's pro-Soviet Union. There seems to be this division, okay, that's dividing us too. So Churchill said there is a very big divide in ideology. Remember ideology, we are talking about communism versus democracy. That's the divide in ideology. And politically, where we're talking about the two different alliances. One group is pro-US, one group is pro-Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union at that time was trying to build a very strong sort of a wall. Later you really see they really built a wall, Germany. And the Soviet Union was also trying to, the USA was trying to contain the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was also trying to block the West from spreading their influence. So both sides are trying to contain each other and make sure the other party don't get too strong and too influential. Okay. The third example on how they can contain that you can try and remember is the Truman Doctrine. You might not need to remember all the example, but I'll go through all of them so you decide which one you want to remember and use more in your essay. Okay, so the Truman Doctrine, remember just now, Cannon sent this message to the US president saying Moscow is dangerous, Soviet Union is dangerous, must be contained. Truman Doctrine is basically what happened, what's the result of that. Okay, so the doctrine basically the President Truman basically decided that, you know, we need to contain the Soviet Union by making sure we have as many friends as possible. And one of the things is we want to provide a lot of aid to other countries that is under communist threat. If you are too poor, chances are a lot of people want to be communist because, you know, communists want to spread the wealth, right? Make it equal. So if you have a lot of poor people, the poor people want to convert to communism and try and get a share of those wealth. So the US wanted to provide aid to many countries that were under threat or very poor so that they will not turn to communism and become friends with the Soviet Union. So one example you can remember is they provide aid to countries like Turkey and Greece. Okay, why Turkey and Greece? If you look at the map, I can show you again. Okay, Greece is here, Turkey is here, all very close to Soviet Union. If you don't do things to help Greece and Turkey, you don't try and befriend Greece and Turkey, one day this country may convert red color to communism. So Truman wanted to target all these countries at, you know, near the border, right? And try and make friends, make them your friends. Okay, so that's why they gave a lot of aid to Turkey and Greece so that, you know, they stay very friendly to USA. They don't decide to join the Soviet Union group. Okay, so one of the example of this sort of aid that was provided, you can remember, is called the Marshall Plan. So there are a lot of keywords: Truman Doctrine, Marshall Plan. You can memorize this keyword, but you must be able to tell me roughly what it is. So let's understand it now. So to provide aid, Marshall Plan is basically a form of economic aid to give many countries that were very poor. They were very poor from the World War II. Okay, so they gave a lot of money, okay, hoping to win a lot of favor. And the USA wanted to give money because, like I said, communism usually flourish when the country is very poor. Okay, so they want to give these countries a lot of money When you love money, you realize, hey, money is a good thing, and communism is not a good idea, because remember, communism don't really want people to get richer, everyone's equal. Whereas in the US, the free market, you are allowed to get rich. They like this idea of people being able to get richer than others. So they want to give a lot of money, give people a taste of being rich, and therefore they will not want to turn to communism. Okay. So a lot of countries, they accepted billions of dollars from the US, as well as technical assistance. That means they send them their advisors, they send them their scientists to help them grow their country, rebuild their country. Okay. On the other hand, Stalin was like, USA trying to win over so many countries by giving money. So Stalin did not allow all the countries that were on his side, right, to take any money from US, because they wanted to keep his influence over these countries. So USA were trying to steal followers, Stalin trying to keep the followers away from US. Okay, just now you mentioned like the Iron Curtain, that is the divide we're talking about. Okay, so both sides saw each other as being very aggressive, especially the Soviet Union saw containment. Containment is targeted usually at targeted at Soviet Union. So Soviet Union definitely thought the US were being very aggressive and did not like it. Okay, so when the US tried to contain and suppress the Soviet Union will want to do the same back. Okay, so the Soviet Union set up these two things. One is the CIB, or the Comintern. Okay, maybe you might not remember the name, but at least try and remember the acronym. You can use some of them as an example. Okay, so the Soviet Union tried to create a grouping. It's basically a grouping. Okay, it's like you can call it a pro-USSR grouping. And under this grouping, okay, they are supposed to cooperate. That means they say, USA is giving money, don't take the money. We will build up your economy together. Okay, and they set up one of the things that they set up, the Soviet Union set up, is this thing called Comecon, or the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance. Again, it's quite a mouthful, so try and understand what it does, and then when you memorize, you don't need to memorize the small details. So basically, the Soviet Union USSR also try to give money. USA wanted to give money to buy friends, buy followers. USSR wanted to try to do the same also. But unfortunately, USSR is not very good at this, because USSR is not as powerful and not as rich as USA. So there's a limit to how much aid it can give. And many historians also said, although sometimes the USSR give money, but sometimes actually it was the Soviet Union that benefited, because for example, the USSR will say, I give you money, but you sell me your resources. Okay, sell me your food, sell me your resources. And sometimes the country, does not benefit. They take the money, but the USSR also benefit, feel exploited. Okay, so two examples coming from Comecon. Maybe I'll probably remember Comecon, because Comecon is about the giving of money, so it's a much more useful example and easier to describe. Okay, so both sides. On one side, we have the Marshall Plan, or the Truman Doctrine. On the other side, we have like the Comecon. So both sides are trying to influence each other and contain each other. Okay, and it led to a lot of distrust, a lot of tension, because both sides think they are trying to control and undermine each other, not allow them to grow. Okay, so it created a lot of hostility, it worsened the relationship and led to Cold War. Okay. All right, so these are all the factors we have covered on why the Cold War broke out. So you can roughly categorize them into before, during, and after the war. But you can also find a way to categorize. Some of the factors are blaming the USA. Some factors blame the USA. For example, Russian Civil War, we are blaming the USA because it's their country's war. Why do you go and interfere? Right? America containing is blaming, the Cold War on America trying to control USSR. Okay, so establishing Soviet states, blaming obviously the Soviet Union for trying to create an alliance of sort. Okay, so this is the overview on all the reasons. It's a very long chapter, so I hope you understood some of the points. Okay, maybe not all the points, but some of the points. And when you understand already, then you memorize some of these keywords, then it makes more sense. Okay. So how we're going to go to the last part. So we talk about the reasons so far. So how did the Cold War eventually develop? Okay, we're going to go through that in the subsequent chapters, but we'll do a very quick summary here. So eventually, because of the Cold War, the world will divide into two later. And there will be a very clear military alliance led by the USA versus the alliance led by the USSR. Okay, the world will be divided into two. Let's write it down so you divided into two. Okay, the world is divided into two parts basically. Okay, so just now we thought, okay, the world divided, those on the US side were those on the Soviet Union side. Okay, two blocks or two parties or two groups. Okay, one side got Marshall Plan, USA give money. One side got Comecon, Soviet Union give money. Okay, and the world become bipolar. Bipolar basically means there's two sides or two groups. Okay, either you're on the US side or you're on the Soviet Union side. Okay. And the second outcome of the Cold War is this thing called the Berlin blockade. Just now we talked about how they wanted to divide the world. So in the case of Berlin, it was actually physically divided because the Soviet Union actually built a wall around the British, French, and American side of Berlin. They didn't want other people to get into Berlin. They didn't want people to get out of the Allied side of Berlin. They didn't want the US to, you know, for example, the people living here to influence the people on the east side led by the Soviet Union. So they built out this wall to control them. Okay, we'll learn more about this next time. But basically, you know, the Stalin wanted to block Germany and build a wall around Berlin. Okay, because they were not very happy that, you know, the Allies controlled so much in Germany, and they wanted to, okay, they wanted to stop the Allies from spreading their pro-democratic and pro-Western attitudes. That's why they built out like a wall, a fence, so that, you know, people cannot travel across the border into the Soviet Union controlled areas of Germany and Berlin to spread these ideas. Okay, and it led to a lot of suspicion. Okay, so this is the very famous Berlin Wall. If you go to Germany next time, you will see parts of the wall still remain as a historical landmark. Okay. All right. So one of the incidents that happened was, you know, when they built this wall around, right? And the Soviet Union not only controlled this side of Berlin, because Berlin was situated within the east side of Germany. So actually, the Soviet Union also controlled all these territories surrounding the west side of Berlin. So the Allies, the US, was very stuck because nobody can get in and out into this side of Berlin. And all these people are going to starve to death because they may not have enough food to eat in there. So what the US decided to do was they did this thing called the Berlin Airlift. Okay. And during this airlift, they actually you say, okay, you control all this territory, I cannot send my food in via land, so I'll fly in and drop whatever supplies that my West Berliners need. Okay, so it was very embarrassing. The Soviets did not dare to shoot down the place because they did not want to fight. Remember, this is a Cold War, they did not want to fight each other directly. And as a result, it was a very humiliating incident. Okay, you can see Stalin here trying to block the West from coming into East Germany, including Berlin, but you know, they will just fly over. Your war can't stop an airplane from flying over and dropping their supplies. Okay, so it also led to a lot of humiliation. Okay, with a lot of embarrassment on the Soviet Union, and needless to say, it worsened the relationship even more. Okay, so the world divided into two, right? One of the example you can remember is the West was led by the USA, formed this alliance called the NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That means they promised to protect each other. If Soviet Union dare to attack you, I will attack you, I will defend you. So it's an alliance. And the Soviet Union, not to lose out, also created their alliance, their own version of NATO called the Warsaw Pact. Basically, they say if the US try to attack you, Soviet Union will come and defend you. Okay? And that is the Warsaw Pact, and they undermine each other and led to a lot of tension, divided the world into two parts, bipolar. Okay, and last but not least, okay, the war was not just in Europe, the Cold War was not just in Europe. Eventually later you will learn in the subsequent chapter in Korea, in Cuba, they will have all this tension and all this conflict all over the world. Okay, not just Europe. So this is one of the impact of the Cold War also. Okay, I'm gonna skip all these things now. All this we'll learn in the next few chapters. Okay, so that is a very long video. I hope I help you to understand the reasons behind the Cold War and some of the impact a little bit better. Again, once you understand, test yourself, try and see if you can write out the points in your own words or say out in your own words. And then when you memorize the fact, then after you memorize the factor, because in exam sometimes you need to have some words to try and jolt your memory, and then you memorize the factor. So understand first, then try and memorize some of the factors. All right. Thank you for watching. If you're watching to the end, okay. If you still have any questions, read your notes. If you still don't understand, and try and contact me and clarify your doubts with your teacher. Okay. Thank you very much. I'll end the video here.